You are 52. Rural Phocis. The mountain is cold in October. The fire inside the tripod smells like burned laurel. Your name is Perialla. And in 491 BCE, a Spartan king bribes a man named Koban to bribe you. Herodotus, Book 6, Chapter 66, names you. He names the bribe. He names the fall. Your textbook names none of it. For the next 18 minutes, every time we call her the Pythia, anonymous, generic, the priestess, the priests who edited her win again. 3 women, 3 names. One was bribed, one named Salamis, one taught Pythagoras. Historians still debate the trance chamber. They do not debate her name. Don't let them stay erased. The selection criteria look noble on paper. Plutarch, who actually worked as a priest at Delphi in the late 1st century, writes in Moralia 405c that the Pythia was chosen from local Phocian women. No formal education required. No noble lineage required. Just availability. Walk-up oracle service. For centuries, the textbook leaves it there. Pious peasant girl. Sacred calling. Then Diodorus Siculus, Book 16, Chapter 26, drops the actual reason. A man named Echecrates of Thessaly walked into the temple. He saw a young Pythia. He raped her. Delphi's response was not to punish Echecrates. Delphi's response was to change the hiring policy. From that point on, every Pythia had to be over 50 years old, but dressed in the costume of a young virgin, to preserve the aesthetic the worshippers expected. That's the rule. That's where it comes from. The temple did not fix the rapist. The temple fixed the optics. Delphi's HR policy was rape reactive. Risk management dressed up as tradition. The woman on the tripod was older than your mother. She was dressed like she was younger than your daughter. And the textbook called the whole thing a sacred calling, because sacred is what they say when they don't want to look at it. Honored is not the same as protected. If the body was a hiring problem, the mind was a credit problem. And the most famous philosopher in Greek history learned his ethics from a woman whose name almost made it out alive. Lisa Maurizio, Journal of Hellenic Studies 115, 1995, pages 69 to 86. The paper that broke the passive vessel model of the Pythia open. Maurizio argued what the textbook still won't say out loud. The women on that tripod had agency, training, doctrine. They weren't conduits. They were practitioners. Which raises a question the documentary you watched last week did not ask. If they had doctrine, who did they teach? Aristoxenus of Tarentum, 4th century BCE, recorded the answer. Diogenes Laertius, Book 8, Chapter 21, copied it forward. Porphyry, Life of Pythagoras, Chapter 41, copied it again, though he calls her Aristoclea. Her name was Themistoclea. She was a Pythia, at Delphi, in the 6th century before the Common Era, and she taught Pythagoras his moral doctrines. Not inspired him, not whispered to him in a dream, taught him. As in, he sat down, she talked, he took notes. 2,500 years of the father of philosophy, and the curriculum was hers. If you have ever watched a man take your idea in a meeting and walk out with the credit, congratulations, you have just read a footnote of the Matilda effect. Margaret Rossiter, 1993, Social Studies of Science 23, page 325. She named the mechanism. The mechanism is older than her. It has a temple. Themistoclea's name survived. Barely. Through 3 different scribes across 900 years. So here's the unsettling question. If hers made it out, what didn't? Close your eyes for a second. You already know the scene. The tripod. 3-legged, polished, suspended over the chasm. The cold stone of Mount Parnassus, pressing up through her sandals. Burned laurel in the bowl. Barley water in her mouth. A single shaft of October light, hitting the omphalos. The navel stone. And a hush, you could measure in heartbeats. Every documentary opens here. So did mine. At the top of this video, on purpose. The sensory scene is real. The sensory scene is also the trick. Because the part the camera lingers on, body, smoke, stone, was the labor. And the part the camera skips
is where the credit went. Plutarch, who was not a tourist, who was an actual priest at Delphi for the last 20 years of his life, wrote an entire treatise, asking a question his colleagues did not want asked. Why, he said, do the oracles no longer speak in verse? The assumption embedded in the question is the whole game. Because the answer Plutarch gives, in Moralia 394 through 409, is this. The verse was never hers. The dactylic hexameter, the 6-foot epic meter Homer used, was supplied by the prophetai, the male interpreters, who took her ecstatic speech and versified it before it left the temple. Joseph Fontenrose, 1978, The Delphic Oracle, makes the receipt explicit. The rural women of Phocis did not speak in dactylic hexameter. They spoke Phocian Greek. The hexameter was an editorial layer. The hexameter was the ghostwriting. The voice was yours. The verse was not. And here is the part nobody tells you.
Once a saying enters the historical record as verse, the verse is what gets quoted. The verse is what gets carved into stone. The verse is what Pausanias copies into his guidebook 700 years later. The woman who supplied the voice, the agitation, the breath catch, the syllable that came first, does not survive the rewrite. The meter survives. The meter gets the byline. So if the priests owned the verse, here is the next question. Who owned the year? The textbook calls Delphi the sanctuary of Apollo. That is not wrong. That is incomplete. Because Apollo went on vacation, 3 months a year, every winter. Plutarch, the same Delphi priest from the last chapter, writes it in 2 separate treatises. Dii apud Delphos, de defectu oraculorum. From roughly November through January, the Omphalos belonged to Dionysus, the god of wine, the god of ecstasy, the god of the loosened body, the most rational god in the Greek pantheon, the one who governed reason, music, healing, hexameter, handed his own house keys to the god of unreason for 90 days a year, and nobody in the temple thought this was a contradiction. Marcel Detienne, 1989, Dionysus at Large. Hugh Bowden, 2005, Classical Athens and the Delphic Oracle. Both unpack the same structural fact. This was not a footnote. This was the calendar. And here is the part the documentary you watch does not say out loud. Look at who showed up in Dionysus's 3 months. Women, slaves, foreigners, men who wore women's clothing in the procession, followers of 4th century Athenian magistrate, would have prosecuted in any other month of the year, coming up the mountain with full institutional cover. For a quarter of the calendar, Delphi was not a temple of rational male prophecy. It was a temple of everyone the rest of Greek civic life had a problem with. The priests who edited the women's names also edited the calendar. Apollo's sanctuary is the official byline. Apollo's 9-month sanctuary is the receipt. And what got cleaned out of the other 3 months was not the god, it was the followers. Which is fine. Except for one detail. Someone was still counting the money. The textbook tells you Delphi was a sanctuary. Delphi was a sanctuary the way the Vatican is a sanctuary. Which is to say, yes. And also it had a treasury department. Michael Scott, Princeton, 2014, Delphi, A History of the Center of the Ancient World, walks you through the actual ledger. Sparta paid in silver. Athens paid in marble. They built a whole treasury building on the sacred way for their tithe. Siphnos paid in gold from its mines, until the mines flooded, and Apollo, weirdly, never warned them. Croesus of Lydia sent ingots so heavy the priests needed a separate inventory line. This was not a temple receiving gifts. This was an institution accepting invoices. And here is the receipt the documentary you watched did not show you. Plutarch 6 same Delphi priest, from Sec 4 and Sec 5-7, admits in Moralia 414b that on the busiest prophecy days, Delphi ran 2, sometimes 3 Pythias in parallel, a senior on the tripod, a junior in reserve, a third on standby, so they could move the queue. The Pythia's voice was the product. The priests were the sales force. The city-states were the customers. Perialla, Aristonike, Themistoclea 6U were the supply chain. And sacred is the word the institution used on its own invoice header. Sacred is the line item where the labor used to be, which is fine, 6 except for one detail. The moment you ask how she actually did it, the scholarship erupts. For most of the 20th century, the textbook line was simple. There were no vapors. The chasm was a literary invention. Plutarch's Pneuma 6, the divine breath 6, was metaphor at best, priestcraft at worst. Delphi was theater. Then 2001 happened. Gele Zylinga de Boer, John Hale, Geoffrey Chanton, in Geology 29, pages 707 to 710-6, surveyed the bedrock under the Adyton, the inner chamber, and found 2 intersecting fault lines venting ethylene gas. Ethylene, the same compound 1920s anesthesiologists used to put patients into a sweet-smelling euphoric trance. The chasm was real. The breath was real. The textbook owed Plutarch an apology. Then 2007 happened. Joanna Foster and Darren Lehoux, Clinical Toxicology 45, pushed back. The concentrations de Boer measured, they argued, are too low to trance an adult human. The geology stands. The pharmacology, they say, doesn't. And while the geologists and the toxicologists are throwing journal articles at each other, Lisa Maurizio is sitting on the 1995 paper that already said, it doesn't matter. The Pythia had training. The Pythia had doctrine. The trance was practiced, not pumped in. Agency, not gas. The scholarship is alive. The chamber is not just a vibe. And here is the indictment, gentle but firm. The chamber gets a peer-reviewed feud spanning 2 decades and 3 disciplines. The women on the tripod still do not get a name. For 17 minutes we have said 3 names. It is time to make 2 of them have weight. 491 before the Common Era. Sparta has 2 kings, which is 1 king too many. And Cleomenes I has been trying to get rid of his co-king Demaratus for years. Demaratus is the legitimate heir. Cleomenes needs that legitimacy questioned. He needs the most authoritative voice in Greek civic life to say so. He needs Delphi. So Cleomenes finds a man named Cobon, son of Aristophanes, who has influence at the temple. And Cobon finds the Pythia. Her name was Perialla. Herodotus writes it down. Book 6, chapter 66, lines 2 and 3. He names the king who paid. He names the broker who arranged it. He names the priestess who delivered the verdict. Demaratus, the oracle ruled, was not Ariston's son. Demaratus lost the throne. Cleomenes won. And then, because Herodotus is the historian, and not the priest, he writes down what happened next. The bribe was exposed. Cobon was banished. Perialla was deposed. Not martyred. Not tragic. Deposed. The textbook can hold this. She made a real choice. She was bought. She ruled wrongly. She was caught. She was removed. She is a person in a record, not a costume in a tableau. 11 years later, 480 before the Common Era, Xerxes is at the Hellespont, with the largest army the Mediterranean has ever seen. The Persian fleet is 12 miles 6, roughly 19 kilometers 6, off the Greek coast at Artemisium. The Athenians send a delegation to Delphi. They get the most famous oracle in all of Greek history. The wooden walls. Trust in the wooden walls. The walls that will not fall. Themistocles, the Athenian commander, reads it as a navy. 3 months later he wins at Salamis. The Persians retreat. The whole of what becomes Western civilization forks at this one sentence. We are all, in some sense, still living in the world Salamis decided. The woman who delivered that oracle had a name. Herodotus writes it down. Book 7, chapter 140, into chapter 141. Her name was Aristonike. Your textbook used the wooden walls. It did not use her name. 2 women. 1 king who bought one of them. 1 commander who read the other one correctly. 1 historian, Herodotus, naming both of them in the same book. 2,500 years of curriculum has moved Perialla and Aristonike around the room 6 quoted, paraphrased, summarized, mythologized 6, and kept the costume on.
And then one day, the temple stopped writing them down at all. The textbook tells you Delphi declined. Soft verb. Like it ran out of batteries. Delphi did not decline. Delphi was closed.
The last traditional oracle on record at Delphi is delivered around 362 of the Common Era to a court physician named Oribasius, who is traveling on behalf of the Emperor Julian VI, the last non-Christian Roman emperor. The line, preserved in Cedrenus's Compendium and in Philostorgius's Ecclesiastical History, Book 7, Chapter 1, reads 6, and you should hold this lightly, because both sources are late and Christian, and historians flag the wording as possibly literary 6, the speaking water is silent. Apollo no longer has a hut, no laurel, no prophetic spring. Even if the words are stylized, the date and the silence are not. After Oribasius, the record stops. 30 years after Oribasius, in 391 into 392, the Emperor Theodosius I signs 3 edicts. Codex Theodosianus, Book 16, Title 10, Laws 10 through 12. They ban public sacrifice. They ban entering temples to consult. They ban private divination in the home. Empire-wide. Enforceable. The door to Delphi does not creak shut in a poetic mist. The door is closed by an imperial signature with a date stamp. And here is the part the documentary you watched will not say out loud. The Theodosian Code does not just close Delphi. The same 3 laws, the same paragraphs, the same year 6, also target the Mithraic temples, the Eleusinian mysteries, the household soothsayers, and the women who ran healing networks out of their kitchens with herbs and prayers that predated Christianity by 1,000 years. The Theodosian apparatus did not erase one institution. It erased a Category 6, and several smaller institutions that did not have walls thick enough to be named in the chronicles. Michel René Salzman, 1990. The Making of a Christian Aristocracy. Ramsay McMullen, 1997. Christianity and Paganism in the 4th to 8th centuries. Both, on the page, in print, traceable through any university library. Both make the same point, with different tempers. This was a closing of a worldview, and the people inside that worldview, who already had the least name in the official record, had the least chance of getting one out. The door closed once, but it closed on many. The gender non-conforming participants in the Dionysus winter rites, the women who knew which herb to give for which season, the diviners whose names never made it to a temple inventory in the first place. They went out under the same signature as the temple, different scale, same machinery. And by the time the door closed, the names were already gone. Perialla was bribed. Aristonike named Salamis. Themistoclea taught Pythagoras. Echecrates raped a young woman whose name the temple never bothered to write down, and Delphi changed the hiring policy instead of changing him. Theodosius signed the door shut in 392. The priests wrote over her name. They wrote over many. And so did we. Every time we said the Pythia, anonymous, generic, costume on, no roster, every textbook, every documentary, every YouTube essay, including, until about 8 seconds ago, this one. The verb is the use. If you say her name, the edit reverses by exactly 1 woman. So say them, out loud, tonight, to 1 person. To the women whose research walked out in someone else's byline this week, Aristonike sends her regards. To the queer mediums working underground in countries where Theodosian-shaped laws are still on the books, your lineage is older than the codex that erased it. To the grandmothers reading herbs before the journals caught up, Themistoclea has been waiting for you. The mountain keeps its secrets. We do not. Don't call her the Pythia again.